The scorching summer afternoon cast its glow over the peaceful suburban neighborhood. Jamal, a 12-year-old boy with deep brown skin and a warm, gentle smile, was walking his dog, Rex, a golden Labrador with a sleek, shiny coat through the Maplewood Park. This park was a familiar retreat for the inseparable pair, where Jamal often brought Rex to play, run, and enjoy afternoons free of homework. Jamal tossed Rex's favorite red rubber ball, laughing as the dog sprinted at full speed to catch it. His laughter rang out through the quiet air, drawing the attention of a few elderly folks exercising nearby. Some smiled in response, charmed by the heartwarming scene of the boy and his dog enjoying a simple moment together. But not everyone felt at ease. From a distance, Sergeant Dylan Grayson, a middle-aged patrol officer, sat in his car, eyeing Jamal with suspicion. "What's a black kid doing loitering around this upscale neighborhood?" Dylan muttered, his cold gaze narrowing. He pushed open the car door, adjusted his police belt, and started striding toward Jamal. "Hey, kid, stop right there." Dylan's voice cut through the park's tranquility. Sharp and commanding, Jamal turned, startled by the officer's sudden presence. "Yes, sir? Is something wrong?" he asked, his voice steady but betraying a hint of unease. "What are you doing here?" Dylan barked, his tone accusing as he scanned Jamal from head to toe. "This isn't a place for kids like you to hang around." Jamal froze. The words weren't just a question. They carried an unspoken judgment. He opened his mouth to respond, but before he could, Rex let out a bark. Dylan's hand flew to his holster. In a split second, the officer drew his gun, and before Jamal could process what was happening, the gunshot echoed. Rex crumpled to the ground. "No, Rex!" Jamal screamed, his voice cracking with anguish. He rushed to his dog's side, cradling Rex's body as the Labrador's breaths came in shallow, labored gasps. Tears streamed down Jamal's face as he watched his closest companion slip away. Dylan stood firm, unmoved. "I couldn't risk that dog attacking someone," he said coldly, ignoring the boy's heart-wrenching sobs. Jamal practically ran home, his hands and clothes stained with Rex's blood. His mother, Lydia, was in the kitchen preparing dinner when she saw him burst through the door. "Jamal, what happened to you?" Lydia asked, alarmed. But Jamal's only response was a series of choked sobs. Through gasps and tears, Jamal recounted the entire ordeal in a panicked rush. Lydia pulled him into her arms, her own tears spilling as she listened to every word. "They did that to Rex? And dared to treat you like that?" Lydia's arms tightened around her son, her heart breaking as she felt the tremor of his anguished breaths. Determined to act, Lydia immediately called her husband, Marcus Ellis, who was working hundreds of miles away. Marcus, a Supreme Court judge renowned for his relentless pursuit of justice, dropped everything upon hearing the news and booked the earliest flight home. While waiting for Marcus, Lydia turned to social media, sharing Jamal's story in detail. She hoped to rally support and demand justice from the community. The post quickly went viral, garnering thousands of comments and shares, as people expressed outrage and solidarity. When Marcus arrived home, he found Jamal sitting listlessly on the sofa, his eyes swollen and red from crying. Marcus walked over, placed a reassuring hand on his son's shoulder, and said gently, "I'm here now, son." Jamal recounted the story once more, and Marcus listened in stunned silence. His heart ached as he absorbed the details of what his son had endured. "No one has the right to do that to you," Marcus said firmly. "We will fight for justice." The next day, Marcus and Lydia took Jamal to the police station to file a complaint. However, they were met with indifference. The officer on duty even chuckled dismissively after hearing the story. "There's probably some misunderstanding. Sergeant Grayson is a very responsible officer," he said with a smirk. The blatant injustice was undeniable, but Marcus refused to back down. He began gathering documents, collecting evidence, and reaching out to civil rights attorneys to support his family's case. Marcus knew this would be a tough battle, but he was determined to see it through to the end. Jamal and Rex's story spread across media platforms like wildfire. Celebrities, social activists, and online communities rallied behind the Ellis family, demanding justice for Jamal. Hashtags like #JusticeForJamal and #RexTheHero flooded Twitter. Meanwhile, Dylan Grayson received backing from his colleagues and superiors, who claimed he was just doing his duty and had committed no wrongdoing. Dylan even appeared on television, spinning an entirely different narrative. "I felt threatened by that aggressive dog. I had no choice but to defend myself." Dylan's lies fueled Marcus and Lydia's anger, but they remained resolute. Marcus reassured Jamal, "Son, justice doesn't always come quickly, but if we persevere, the truth will always prevail." The family began preparing for a long legal battle, not just for Rex, but for everyone who had ever faced injustice. Marcus knew that to bring Dylan Grayson to justice, he would need a strong legal team. After several discussions, he reached out to Amelia Carter, a renowned civil rights attorney known for taking on high-profile cases against racial discrimination. Amelia was a tough, intelligent black woman unafraid to challenge the system. Their first meeting took place in Amelia's modest downtown office. Marcus recounted Jamal's story in vivid detail, his eyes reflecting both pain and determination. Amelia listened intently, taking meticulous notes on every critical point. "Mr. Ellis," Amelia said after he finished, "this case won't be easy. Dylan isn't just a police officer. He's part of a system that protects its own. But if we persist, I believe the truth will come to light." Amelia began by demanding the police department release Dylan's full personnel records. She also reached out to witnesses who had been at the park that day. An elderly woman came forward, stating she heard Dylan shouting before firing his weapon, but noted that Rex had only been barking and was not attacking anyone. Amelia also dug into Dylan's past and uncovered a troubling history of multiple complaints against him for racial profiling and discriminatory behavior. However, those cases had been quietly dismissed by his superiors. This revelation became a key piece in building the case against him. While Marcus and his legal team worked tirelessly, Dylan Grayson was far from idle. He began crafting his image as the victim through media appearances. In a local television interview, Dylan insisted that he had acted solely in self-defense. "I saw the dog charging at me and didn't have time to think," he said, his tone overly dramatic. "I just did what anyone in my position would have done." The police department also issued an official statement, claiming that Dylan had followed proper protocol and that the use of force was unavoidable. This narrative gained traction, especially among white residents of the neighborhood, who were accustomed to trusting the police without question. However, not everyone sided with Dylan. Some of his colleagues began to express discomfort with his actions. "Dylan has always had biases against people of color," an anonymous officer revealed to the press. "I don't believe he handled the situation professionally." As public pressure mounted, Dylan remained steadfast in his stance. He was confident that the system, which had protected him in the past, would shield him once again. Amelia wasn't solely focused on bringing Dylan to court. She was determined to expose the system that protected abusers of power. She sought out individuals who had previously filed complaints against Dylan. One of them was Marcia Green, a black woman whom Dylan had stopped without cause several years ago. Marcia recounted how Dylan had insulted and threatened her, but when she attempted to file a complaint, the police department ignored her. "I never thought I'd get the chance to tell my story," Marcia said during her meeting with Amelia. "But if this case can bring about some change, I'm willing to testify." Amelia began compiling her case, including statements from Marcia and other witnesses. She also requested footage from surveillance cameras near Maplewood Park. The video revealed that Rex had not attacked Dylan but was merely standing by Jamal when the shooting occurred. Meanwhile, Marcus used his influence to draw attention from civil rights organizations. Groups like the NAACP and ACLU joined the cause, providing legal support and amplifying the Justice for Jamal movement. News of Jamal's case spread across the city and beyond local borders. Protests began to erupt, with hundreds of people carrying signs and chanting slogans, "Justice for Jamal! End racism now!" and "Rex is a hero." Despite his young age, Jamal decided to join one of the protests with his mother. Standing in the middle of the crowd, he held Lydia's hand tightly, feeling the strength of the community around him. "Mom," he said, his voice trembling, "I didn't think so many people cared about me and Rex." "They do, Jamal," Lydia replied, her eyes brimming with tears. "We're not alone. The truth always has allies." However, not everyone welcomed the movement. Extremist groups began sending threats to the Ellis family and the organizations supporting their cause. While Marcus was concerned, he refused to back down. He reassured Lydia and Jamal while taking steps to increase security for his family. "We can't let fear stop justice," Marcus told them. "What we're doing today isn't just for Jamal. It's for everyone who hasn't had a voice." Meanwhile, Dylan started to feel the mounting pressure. He realized that this time, things might not end as they had before. Instead of showing remorse, Dylan became more aggressive, doubling down on his attempts to protect his reputation at all costs. The battle between justice and injustice had reached its most intense stage, with both sides preparing for the impending legal showdown. On the morning of the first hearing, the city's district courthouse was packed. Journalists, social activists, and curious onlookers gathered to witness the Ellis family's case against Dylan Grayson. Outside the courthouse, the atmosphere resembled a large-scale protest. Signs reading "Justice for Jamal" and "Don't Let Violence Win" were held high, mingling with opposing voices from Dylan's supporters. Marcus and Lydia, holding Jamal's hands, entered the courthouse accompanied by Amelia and her legal team. Despite his efforts to appear composed, Jamal couldn't hide his anxiety. "Mom, will they believe me?" he whispered. "Son, trust in the truth," Lydia replied, squeezing his hand tightly. "Justice is always on the side of the righteous." Amelia began the hearing with a powerful opening statement, emphasizing that Dylan's actions not only violated the law but also showcased blatant racial prejudice. One of the most crucial pieces of evidence, surveillance footage, was presented in court. The video clearly showed Rex standing harmlessly near Jamal, wagging his tail, with no sign of aggression before being shot. Dylan's defense team argued that the video did not capture the full context of the incident. They claimed that Dylan acted in the interest of public safety and insisted that an aggressive dog could pose a serious threat. Witnesses, including Marcia Green and others, were called to testify. They shared personal experiences with Dylan, highlighting that this wasn't the first time he had exhibited racist behavior. Their testimonies painted a troubling picture of a pattern of misconduct. As the first day of the hearing concluded, the courtroom remained tense. Both sides were determined to present more evidence and strengthen their arguments in the sessions to come. Amelia delved deeper into Dylan's past, uncovering one of the most significant revelations: internal reports about him within the police department. She successfully filed a motion compelling the department to release records of prior complaints against Dylan. Despite strong resistance, the court ordered the police department to hand over the files. The reports revealed that Dylan had been accused of racial discrimination at least 5 times. Yet none of the cases were taken seriously. One notable incident involved Dylan using unnecessary force against a young black man at a bus stop. These complaints had been systematically overlooked due to protection from his superiors. Amelia brought this evidence to light in the next court session. When the documents were presented, the courtroom fell silent. Marcus looked at Dylan, his expression a mix of disappointment and anger. Dylan, in contrast, kept his head down, avoiding everyone's gaze. The media quickly picked up on the new developments. The case was no longer just a personal lawsuit but had become a symbol of systemic injustice. The exposure of the documents caused a significant upheaval within the police department. Some officers began to publicly express their dissatisfaction with the system's protection of wrongdoers. Heated debates erupted internally, dividing the force between those supporting Dillon and those calling for reform. A young officer, James Carter, decided to come forward and testify against Dillon. James recounted an incident where he witnessed Dillon deliberately stopping a black family's car and threatening them without cause. James admitted that although he wanted to report the misconduct, he was warned by his superiors to avoid stirring up trouble. James's testimony sent shockwaves through the courtroom. It not only further tarnished Dillon's image but also highlighted deeper systemic issues within law enforcement. Under mounting public pressure, the police department announced that it would launch an internal investigation. Amelia and Marcus understood that this case was not just about seeking justice for Jamal. It had the potential to set a precedent for systemic reform. Amelia planned to use the lawsuit as a powerful example of the dangers of racial bias in law enforcement. During the third hearing, Amelia delivered an impassioned speech. She spoke about how prejudice not only harms individuals but also erodes society's trust as a whole. Jamal is not just a victim, Amelia said, looking directly at the jury. This boy is a symbol for all those who have been marginalized because of the color of their skin. And today, we have the opportunity to change that. The jury was sent to deliberate in a private room. As they returned, a tense silence filled the courtroom. Marcus held Lydia and Jamal's hands tightly, feeling the collective anxiety. The presiding judge announced that Dillon Grayson would be formally charged with abuse of power and racial discrimination. The ruling not only brought hope to the Ellis family, but also ignited a spark for reform within the law enforcement system. News of the victory spread nationwide, with media outlets praising Marcus, Lydia, and especially Jamal for their resilience. However, the fight was far from over. Marcus and Amelia knew they needed to continue pushing for lasting changes to ensure that justice prevailed for everyone. That day, the atmosphere in the courtroom was more tense than ever. Jamal, just 12 years old, was called to the stand. He walked in with a serious expression, though his eyes betrayed his anxiety. Marcus gave his son's shoulder a reassuring squeeze before Jamal stepped up, a silent reminder that his family was by his side. Jamal took a deep breath and began recounting the events of that afternoon. Every word he spoke, every detail he shared, came out in a trembling but honest voice. "I just wanted to play with Rex," Jamal said, his eyes welling up as he mentioned his loyal friend. "I didn't do anything wrong. I don't understand why he shot Rex." Dillon's attorneys attempted to trip Jamal up with pointed questions. "Are you sure the dog didn't bark or lunge at Sergeant Grayson?" they asked, their tone dripping with skepticism. Jamal lifted his head, his eyes resolute. "Rex was just standing beside me," he said firmly. "Rex would never hurt anyone." Jamal's sincerity left the courtroom in stunned silence. Some couldn't hold back their tears. He wasn't just a boy recounting his story. He had become a symbol of innocence shattered by prejudice and violence. When Jamal finally stepped down from the stand and returned to his seat, Lydia wrapped her arms around him and whispered, "You did so well, Jamal. We're so proud of you." With the mounting evidence against him, Dillon Grayson could no longer hide the truth. When he was called to testify, all eyes in the courtroom turned toward him. Filled with judgment and skepticism, Dillon stepped up to the stand, his expression cold and detached. He began recounting his version of events, insisting that he felt threatened by the dog and acted to protect himself. However, his testimony began to unravel under Amelia's sharp cross-examination. "You claimed the dog charged at you," Amelia said, her tone cutting. "Yet, in the video, Rex is clearly standing still next to Jamal. How do you explain that?" Dillon stammered, struggling to find an answer. I thought it was going to attack me." "Did you feel? Or did you think?" Amelia pressed, emphasizing each word. "Do you have any evidence to prove that Rex was an actual threat?" Dillon fell silent. His silence spoke volumes. The tension in the courtroom was palpable. Dylan's testimony was no longer credible, and it became clear to everyone that this wasn't just a mistake. It was an act driven by deep-seated prejudice. Amelia knew this was the most critical moment to bring the case to a decisive close. During her final argument, she stepped in front of the jury, locking eyes with each member. "The verdict you deliver today is not just for Jamal or the Ellis family," Amelia began, her voice ringing with conviction. "It is a verdict for a system that has for far too long tolerated wrongdoing. If we don't speak up, if we don't act, who will protect children like Jamal in the future?" She emphasized that Dylan's actions were not merely personal mistakes but the result of a system steeped in prejudice. "We cannot allow fear and bias to dictate the law," she declared. "Today, you have the chance to change that." Dylan's attorneys made their final plea, attempting to convince the jury that Dylan had acted in self-defense. However, the evidence was overwhelming. The surveillance footage, the witnesses' testimonies, and the inconsistencies in Dylan's account left no room for doubt. The jury withdrew to deliberate in private. The wait felt interminable. Jamal held his mother's hand tightly, his eyes glistening with tears but filled with hope. When the jury returned, the tension in the courtroom was palpable. Everyone held their breath, waiting for the verdict. A juror stood and spoke clearly. "We, the jury, find the defendant, Dylan Grayson, guilty of using unnecessary force and committing acts of racial discrimination." Applause erupted throughout the courtroom. Lydia embraced Jamal, both of them breaking into tears. Marcus, sitting beside them, simply nodded, his eyes reflecting relief and gratitude. Dylan bowed his head, the arrogance he once displayed now replaced with defeat. The police department promptly announced plans to implement reforms to ensure such incidents would not happen again. However, Marcus understood this was only the beginning. After the trial, Jamal was interviewed by a group of reporters. When asked how he felt, Jamal replied, "I just want people to know that Rex was a good dog, and I hope no one else has to go through this again." The Ellis family's story became more than just a legal victory. It became a beacon of hope for many across the nation. They had shown that, no matter how daunting the challenge, justice could prevail when one has the courage to fight for it. After the trial, the Ellis family's life gradually returned to normal, but the emotional scars left by the incident ran deep. Although Jamal had regained his smile, he still carried the sadness of losing his loyal friend, Rex. Marcus decided to enroll Jamal in therapy to help him process and overcome his negative emotions. The sessions not only gave Jamal a space to share his pain, but also helped him recognize his inner strength. "You're not just a victim," the therapist told Jamal during one session. "You stood up for truth and justice, something not everyone has the courage to do." Meanwhile, Lydia began working with organizations advocating for the rights of racial discrimination victims. She used her experiences to support other families going through similar struggles. Marcus, despite his busy schedule at the Supreme Court, made it a priority to spend more time with his family. He often spoke with Jamal, sharing stories about the fight for justice and the importance of believing in change. Evening family gatherings became a new tradition, bringing warmth and connection to their home. The lawsuit not only had a significant impact on the legal system, but also shed light on the shortcomings in law enforcement practices. Marcus, as a Supreme Court judge, understood that this was an opportunity to push for broader reforms. During a speech at a prestigious university, Marcus shared his family's story. "No one should be judged based on the color of their skin or their background," he said, his voice filled with emotion. "Justice is not a privilege for some. It is a fundamental right for all." Marcus urged lawmakers to implement reforms to ensure that those who abuse their power are held accountable. He proposed establishing an independent body to investigate police misconduct and retraining law enforcement officers to treat all citizens with fairness and respect. Marcus's speech was widely covered by the media and received strong support from civil rights organizations. It became the catalyst for a series of discussions on systemic reform, sparking hope for a fairer and more just future. After the court's verdict, Dylan Grayson was officially dismissed from the police force and faced prison time for abuse of power. However, the consequences extended beyond that. Dylan's reputation was ruined, and he became a symbol of systemic failure. Life after the trial was bleak for Dylan. Those who once supported him gradually turned their backs, while the community continued to condemn his actions. Dylan began to realize that his behavior not only destroyed the lives of the Ellis family but also his own. Notably, Dylan started to acknowledge his mistakes. In an interview with a local newspaper, he admitted, "I let my biases dictate my actions. I can't undo what happened, but I hope to find a way to do something better in the future." While Dylan's confession couldn't erase the harm he caused, it sparked a larger conversation about the potential for redemption and change in those who have made grave errors. Some accepted his apology, but the majority remained skeptical. A year after the lawsuit, the Ellis family had fully weathered the storm of public attention. Jamal, now 13 years old, had grown into a stronger and more resilient boy, inspired by Rex, the loyal dog he continued to remember fondly. Jamal joined an animal protection club. Jamal also participated in school discussions, sharing his story and encouraging his peers to speak out against injustice. "If we stay silent, wrongs will keep happening," Jamal said during one talk. "But if we stand together, we can make a difference." Lydia and Marcus continued their work with civil rights organizations, frequently attending workshops and forums to inspire others to fight for justice. The Ellis family not only overcame their hardships but also turned them into a driving force for creating positive change in society. Their story became a symbol of hope and resilience, reminding people that no matter how powerful injustice may seem, justice can prevail when we refuse to give up on truth and righteousness.